There's a specific kind of heartbreak in checking a cutting for the 10th day in a row and finding the same bald, hopeful little stem. Back before rooting hormone came in expensive little jars, people just reached for willow, honey, and aloe, and their cuttings rooted like weeds. That's the trick the garden center will happily sell around, but never sell you. The whole recipe runs about $1, and roots go a little wild. So let's clear up the biggest myth in propagation right now. The fix was never an expensive powder. That little jar of rooting hormone on the shelf is a synthetic copy of something plants have been making on their own for as long as there have been plants. The active ingredient is a rooting signal, and that signal happens to sit inside a few things you probably already have in your kitchen and your yard. Willow and honey, a little aloe, and a pinch of cinnamon. 4 ordinary things mixed the right way that tell a cutting it is time to grow roots. By the end of this, you will know exactly what each ingredient does, exactly how much to use, and exactly how to apply it, whether you are rooting a snipped stem in a glass of water or settling a nervous transplant into the ground. And the whole batch costs you about $1, or nothing at all if you have a willow tree nearby. Let me walk you through the recipe, then break down why every single piece of it works. Here is the whole thing in one breath. You steep a handful of young willow twigs in warm water overnight to make willow water. You stir in a spoonful of raw honey. You blend in a little fresh aloe gel. And you keep a shaker of ground cinnamon nearby for the cut end. That mixture is your rooting booster. You dip cuttings in it, you soak stubborn ones for a few hours, and you water it around the roots of a fresh transplant to calm the shock. Now let me show you what each part is actually doing down there, because once you understand the why, you will never buy the jar again. Start with the willow, because willow is the engine of this whole recipe. If you have ever noticed how a willow branch will sprout roots just from sitting in a wet ditch, you have already seen the magic. Willow bark and young willow shoots are loaded with 2 natural compounds. The first is a plant hormone in the auxin family, the same family that synthetic rooting powders are trying to imitate. According to garden therapy, that natural auxin is what actually signals a cutting to start pushing out roots. The second compound is salicylic acid, which is the plant version of aspirin. It works like a security guard, helping the cutting fight off the bacteria and fungus that would otherwise rot the cut end before roots ever form. So willow does 2 jobs at once. It tells the plant to grow roots, and it protects the plant while it does. Making willow water is about as hard as making tea, and it is roughly the same idea. You want young, flexible twigs, the green and thin new growth, because that is where the rooting compounds are most concentrated. Cut a good handful, snip them into pieces about 1 inch or 2 long, and drop them into a jar. Pour warm water over them, enough to cover them well, and let the whole thing sit somewhere out of the way overnight, or up to about 24 hours for a stronger brew. The water will take on a faint tea color, a little like weak tea, and that color is your sign the compounds have leached out. Strain the twigs out, and what is left is your willow water. If you have time and no rush, you can skip the warm water and steep the twigs in cool water for 2 or 3 days instead, which some old-timers swear pulls out a gentler, cleaner brew. Either way works. It keeps in the refrigerator for a couple of weeks, so a single batch handles a whole season of small cuttings, and you can steep a fresh jar in the time it takes to finish your morning coffee. Now I want to be honest with you about willow, because you deserve the real picture, not a sales pitch. The natural auxin in homemade willow water is real, but it is milder than what you get in a commercial jar. For soft, green, tender cuttings, that gentle strength is exactly right. But for tough, woody hardwood cuttings, the kind you take from a mature shrub in the dead of winter, homemade willow water is going to be the underdog. So save this recipe for the plants that respond best to it, and I will tell you exactly which ones those are in a minute. Next comes the honey, and honey is the bodyguard of the recipe. Honey does not contain a rooting hormone. What it does is keep your cutting alive long enough for the willow to do its work. Raw honey is naturally antibacterial and antifungal. When you coat a fresh cut in it, you are sealing off the wound from the microbes that cause rot. Think of it the way you would think of a clean bandage on a scraped knee. The bandage is not what heals the skin, but it keeps the wound clean so the healing can happen. Honey does the same thing for a cutting. And this is not just old garden folklore. There is actual research behind it. According to Deep Green Permaculture, a study on plant cuttings found that the ones treated with honey had a lower death rate and produced more roots than untreated cuttings. That lines up perfectly with what honey is doing. Fewer cuttings rotting means more cuttings surviving long enough to root. To use it, you just stir a spoonful of raw honey into your willow water until it dissolves. Raw is the word that matters here. The cheap processed honey has been heated and filtered in ways that can strip out the very properties you want, so reach for the raw stuff if you have it. Then we have aloe vera, and aloe is the nurse. If you have ever broken off a leaf and rubbed the cool gel on a sunburn, you know that aloe soothes. It does something similar for a cutting. Fresh aloe gel contains its own salicylic acid, that same protective aspirin-like compound we saw in the willow, so it reinforces the plant's defenses. But aloe also brings a whole mix of vitamins, enzymes, and plant sugars that seem to ease the shock of being cut and give the young roots a gentler place to start. According to Daisy Creek Farms, aloe works right alongside honey and cinnamon as part of a natural rooting blend, and the three of them cover different jobs without stepping on each other. Getting the gel is simple. Snap off one of the thick lower leaves of an aloe plant, slice it open lengthwise, and scoop out the clear inner gel with a spoon. You want the clear jelly from the center, not the yellowish layer just under the skin. Blend a small spoonful of that gel into your willow and honey mixture, and you have got all three working ingredients in one cup. If you keep an aloe plant on a sunny windowsill, and a lot of us do, you have a lifetime supply sitting right there for free. And if you are finding this useful and you love the idea of doing more in the garden for less, take a second to subscribe. This channel is all about getting real results out of budget gardening, and there is plenty more where this came from. Now the last ingredient is cinnamon, and cinnamon is the shield. This one you keep separate, as a dry powder, rather than mixing it into the liquid. Ground cinnamon is a genuine antifungal. It is not a hormone and it will not make roots grow, so do not expect it to do the willow's job. What it does is guard the exact spot where fungus loves to attack, which is the fresh open wound at the base of your cutting. A lot of cuttings never fail because they could not root. They fail because a fungus got into that cut end first and turned it to mush. Cinnamon stops that. Before you dip a cutting in your rooting liquid, or right after, dust the very bottom of the cut stem with a little ground cinnamon. Think of it as a protective cap over the most vulnerable inch of the whole plant. So there is your full team. Willow gives the signal to grow roots. Honey keeps the cutting clean while it works. Aloe soothes the shock and reinforces the defenses. Cinnamon shields the wound from rot. 4 ordinary things, and every one of them is doing a specific, understandable job. There is no mystery ingredient and no expensive secret. The plant already knows how to make roots. You are just handing it the tools and clearing the obstacles out of the way. Let me tell you how to actually use it, because the method matters as much as the mixture. For a soft stem cutting, take your snip in the morning when the plant is full of water, cut just below a leaf node at a slight angle, and strip the lower leaves off so the bare stem can go into the mix. Pinch off any flowers or buds too, because you want the cutting spending its energy on roots, not blooms. Dust the cut end with cinnamon, dip the bottom inch into your willow, honey and aloe blend, and then set the cutting into moist potting mix or a clean glass of the willow water itself. For a stubborn cutting that is slow to root, you can let it soak in the liquid for a few hours before you plant it, giving those compounds more time to soak in. For a transplant, the trick is a little different, but just as easy. When you move a seedling or a young plant into a new spot, mix a splash of your willow water into a watering can and pour it in around the roots as you settle the plant. That dose of natural rooting signal and salicylic acid helps the roots reach out into the new soil faster and take some of the sting out of transplant shock. It is the difference between a plant that sulks for 2 weeks and one that shrugs off the move and keeps growing. Now, which cuttings actually reward you for all this? This recipe shines on soft and green growth, the tender, herbaceous, and softwood cuttings. Tomato cuttings root so eagerly, it almost feels like cheating. Basil and most other kitchen herbs are nearly foolproof. Coleus with those bright painted leaves, roots in a glass of willow water on a windowsill. Soft new growth from roses, taken in early summer, while the stems are still bending and green, responds beautifully. So does hydrangea from that same soft summer wood. These are the plants where homemade willow water is not the underdog at all. It is right in its element, and it will hold its own against the store-bought jar. One small habit makes a big difference on the water glass method. Change the willow water every 3 or 4 days so it stays fresh and clear, because stale, cloudy water is exactly the kind of place where rot gets started. Give your cuttings bright light, but keep them out of harsh, direct sun that would wilt them before the roots can catch up. And then the hardest part of the whole thing, which is simply leaving them alone. Most soft cuttings will show their first white roots somewhere between 1 and 3 weeks, and the tug that tells you it worked is worth the wait. Set your expectations honestly, and you will be thrilled. I am not going to promise you some exact multiple of roots, because your willow, your honey, and your particular cuttings are all a little different. And any gardener who gives you a precise number is guessing. What I will tell you is what generations of gardeners already knew before the jars showed up on the shelf. Cuttings treated this way tend to root faster, they tend to root stronger, and fewer of them rot along the way. You get more survivors, and the survivors get going quicker. And you get all of that for the price of a spoonful of honey and a handful of twigs. Think about what that actually means for a whole season. The little jar of rooting hormone runs you somewhere around $8 to $12, and half of it dries out in the back of a drawer before you finish it. This recipe costs you about $1, and most of that dollar is the honey, which you already own. The willow is free off a tree. The aloe is free off your windowsill. The cinnamon is already in your spice rack. One evening of steeping twigs, and you can root a whole tray of tomato starts, a row of basil for the kitchen, a dozen coleus to fill your shady beds, and a handful of rose and hydrangea cuttings to hand to your neighbors. From ingredients that would have gone unnoticed in your kitchen. That is really the heart of the whole thing. Every rooting signal a plant needs is already sitting in cheap, ordinary places. In the bark of a common tree. In a jar of honey. In the leaf of a windowsill plant. In a jar of spice. The garden industry took those signals, bottled a synthetic version, and sold it back to us with a price tag. But the originals never went anywhere. They were in the kitchen the whole time. And once you have made a batch of this yourself and watched it work, that little jar on the store shelf loses its grip on you for good. You stop reaching for the checkout aisle and start reaching for the willow tree. And there is a quiet kind of satisfaction in that. There is a particular feeling that comes on some slow afternoon a few weeks after you have set your cuttings, when you give one a gentle tug and feel it hold, feel that faint, stubborn resistance of new white roots gripping the soil. You made that happen with a handful of twigs and a spoon of honey. No jar, no receipt, no trip to the store. Just you, a few humble ingredients, and a windowsill full of new plants that cost you almost nothing. If a recipe like this is your idea of a good time, you are going to feel right at home here. There are plenty more of these budget gardening tricks on the channel, so stick around and grow a little more for a lot less.